right. So we have Ali Jamal Awad on today. He is at CEO Lawyer on all platforms. I would love, Ali, for you to go ahead and just introduce yourself before we get into the topic matter. How are you doing, man?
Hey, man, I'm awesome. Zach, thank you so much for having me. My name is Ali Jamal Ibrahim Khalil Yusuf Musa Awad. And I like to say I actually made my law school dean announce my full name during my graduation. I'm a Palestinian, born in America, lived my entire life here, except for a couple of years in early childhood. And today I run a multinational law firm as well as a coaching business for lawyers. And I post some content on social media too. That's probably how you found me.
Content on social media. You absolutely do. So I want to open with a question that is obviously it's a center of debate. It's a center of a lot of heated emotional conversation. But I thought that you will have a different perspective as a Palestinian-American who is seeing firsthand just information get thrown around left or right, true or misinformation. So I want to just start with a general question of what is actually going on the Gaza Strip right now?
It's a genocide of Palestinians.
And what would you define that as?
The intentional ethnic cleansing, murder, torture, rape, killing of Palestinians to take their land because you believe you have a higher right to that land than they do. And in the process, you're destroying the entire land in order to do it. That's the essence of Zionism.
And who would you say at this moment is the main curator of that? Who's the perpetrator of that effort at this moment?
The Rothschild family.
Not the answer I expected. Why the Rothschild family?
Look at the Balfour Declaration. That's where it started.
1917.
Yes, sir. So you're aware of the Balfour Declaration.
Yes, sir.
1917. Britain decided to sell the land of Palestine to the Rothschild family to start a new Jewish settlement, a land that wasn't theirs. It just kind of tells you a little bit about that colonial mentality that European civilizations had. And this is not an obscure thing. Algeria went through a crazy genocide. It lasted for about 100 years. Morocco went through a genocide. Libya is going through crazy turmoil now. I wouldn't label that as a genocide, but if you look at the perpetrators of genocide over centuries, you're going to see British, you're going to see Belgian, and you're going to see French. And modern day is just the remnants of that. The U.S. is a British colony that just sort of evolved. Canada is a French colony that sort of evolved. And the U.S. has always been an expansionist project. It's always been intentionally designed to take more land, take more resources, and it evolves in just sort of a crazy way over the years. And we can get into that. But the issue of Palestine specifically is that the British tried to sell the land of the Palestinians to a Zionist who didn't even believe in God and felt that they had a higher right to this land. And what initially started as just migration of Jewish people with commingling, it's a huge population of Muslims, Jews, Christians, all living in this land. It wasn't until 1948, the Nakba, or the Great Catastrophe, when there was a mass expulsion of Palestinians. And, depending on where you want history to start, 1917, the 3 decades between that to get to 1948, and then there was another great catastrophe in 1967. But the interesting thing to know is that all of the people in Gaza right now all came from the rest of Palestine when there was the mass expulsion in 1967. The same genocide that you're seeing now, it happened in 1967 and it happened in 1948. The Gazans that are in Gaza right now, and they're not Gazans, they're Palestinians. They lived in Gaza, and my mom was born there. My mom's U.S. passport says she's from the Gaza Strip. They are Palestinians that were pushed into this small corridor of land called the Gaza Strip in 1967. And that was their solution. It was a temporary solution to the Palestinian problem, i.e., how could we have a democracy when one side of people, one group of people, are treated as subhuman? Well, the only way for a democracy to work is to outnumber the population of the ones that you consider to be subhuman, which is Israelis consider themselves better than Palestinians. In fact, there's multiple levels of citizenship in Israel. The white European colonialists get the highest level of citizenship. The Palestinians that were born there and lived there might have Israeli citizenship, but it's secondary to the European Israeli citizenship, or the Zionist Israeli citizenship.
Wow.
And so, and Palestinians in Gaza get none of that. You know, they've been under siege and occupation for decades. And so what you're seeing now in Gaza is their final solution to the Palestinian problem. It's been something that's been going on for over 100 years. And it's constantly been the ethnic cleansing and the usurpation of land, of resources, and of people. And that's what you're seeing now. The only difference is we have TikTok now, and people can see it, and they can question it after it going on for years. It's like, this doesn't seem very American of us. But there's a deeper problem in America. So what's happening in Gaza isn't the problem of Americans. What's happening in America is the problem of Americans. And it just so happens that your American politicians are in Israel right now. There's 250 legislators in Israel right now. How is that? How does that work? How is it that a question to the New York City mayor candidate is, where are you going to go visit? Dude, what does going to a foreign country have to do with running a city? So we can go down this rabbit hole as much as you want, and I'll try to keep it, on track for you. But what's happening right now is the final solution of Zionists continuing the ethnic cleansing and the theft, the usurpation, the murder, the stealing of these resources and the Palestinians' land, and having fun while they're doing it. It's a very sick, depraved society.
Wow. The 1967 reference, you're referencing, brush me up on the history. That's the Six-Day War, correct?
Yes.
And that was Egypt and Syria around, I think the Suez Canal was the main conundrum there?
I believe it was the Sinai.
Sinai Canal, yeah.
Yes.
Correct.
The Sinai Desert. So, it was Israel's plan was to kind of continue its expansion, which is very reminiscent of the United States itself. I mean, to understand Israel, you have to understand United States history. Because, do you know when Harvard was established?
No. When was Harvard established?
Well, do you know when America, for the Declaration of Independence, was signed?
1776, yeah.
Yeah, and so we know that date. We know July 4th, 1776. But people were already here. And the way you know that is because Harvard was established in the 1600s. Harvard was initially established to teach new colonialists and new immigrants to America how to build homes, how to utilize resources, how to utilize the resources of the existing land. Look it up. And that's why Harvard is such a unique piece of American history, because it was established before America itself. But, understanding the 13 original colonies and understanding New England and understanding there's a bunch of, Brits and Germans and Europeans coming over and kind of establishing themselves. Well, in 1776, you had 13 colonies. But by 1959, you added Hawaii and Alaska, you had Guam, you had, other, American sort of pieces of land that they would consider still under their control. This was a continued colonial expansion project. And, where did Texas come from? It came from the Mexicans, came from Mexico. It was stolen. And France tried to do its thing in Louisiana. That's why when you go to the French corridor in New Orleans, you have all of this French influence. Napoleon tried to do his thing, didn't work out. America won, the Brits won. But the French won in Canada, so they have that piece of the land. So to understand that I'm sure you've heard of the Trail of Tears. They teach it to you very subtly in elementary school, because you have to remember, I went to elementary school, middle school, high school, college, grad school, all here. But then I started studying abroad in other countries. And I lived in China, I lived in Mexico, I lived in Brazil, and I speak multiple languages and talk to people from all sorts of backgrounds. The history that you're taught in America is very different from the history that's taught in other countries. But we know, at least for a fact, that the Declaration of Independence was in 1776, and we know from the establishment of Harvard over 100 years prior to that, that there were already people here for a long time. And we know that we were adding more states and more colonies over the years. Do you think that just happened by accident, or did we really downplay the Trail of Tears? So, long story short, America is the genocidal country. America established itself upon genocide of Native Americans, including Native Mexicans. And that's why they were able to push all the way through Texas and then expand all the way to California. Well, what happens when you get all the way to California? You run out of space in America, and now you need strategic locations. Alaska just so happens to be a rock's throw away from Russia. That's why they have it there. Hawaii just so happens to be strategically located near Japan. That's why they have, control over there. And I don't know what's going on in Hawaii. I mean, Larry Ellison owns like 98% of one of the islands. Guam, Puerto Rico. And now you're seeing this continued expansion, but it's different now. It's different because Israel has nuclear power, and they stole this nuclear power. The reason JFK was assassinated was because of this nuclear power. But it's different now because the America that we created by colonizing Native Americans is now colonized by the Israelis.
I want to go through a couple things you said there. You'd mentioned Rothschild as the main proponent to the problem, 1917, the Balfour Accord. Super strong ties to Harvard as well. And you bring up the Napoleonic Wars, and the Rothschild family actually funded both sides of that effort. Yeah. So it seems like that name pops up quite a bit in this entire deal. Let me switch gears. October 7th, 2023. What's your understanding of the unfolding of those events? Because that is something that gets really immunized as the main piece of evidence toward the argument of Israel has a right to defend itself. So what is your understanding of the events that unfolded, and how do you perceive it?
Yeah, October 7th was a reaction to a decades-old problem. But it was a reaction that was also controlled and perpetrated and massively effectuated by Israel itself. And when you watch interviews from people that have gone to Israel and have seen how much security is everywhere, where you can't go 50 feet without running into a kid with an AK or an AR-15 in IDF uniform, it's highly improbable. I don't want to use the word impossible because nothing is impossible anymore. It's highly improbable and highly unlikely that such an act could have been committed without Israel knowing about it. And then you have to think...
Didn't it take them like 6 hours to respond? Is that the proper time frame?
Yeah, it was about 6 hours to respond. They were told to stand down. The IDF soldiers were told to stand down. There was... And you should know that there's this argument that's thrown around that Gaza's been free since 2005. No, Gaza's not been free since 2005. Israel pulled out of Gaza in terms of military invasion, but not before bombing the only airport in Gaza. And not before controlling all of the water and resources that go into Gaza. Not before rationing the type of medicine that's allowed inside Gaza. And so October 7th was a reaction to all of this. And if you're thinking about Palestinians with rocks and makeshift rockets being able to commit, such an act, you have to think about, what does Israel benefit from having something like this happen? And I think now what we're seeing is, and every Palestinian, every Arab knew exactly what was going to happen after October 7th. We knew this was about to be a genocide of epic proportions. We knew it. Every single person was scared. Everyone. And unlike the dancing Israelis, deep down, we knew that this was going to be the opportunity for Israel to ethnically cleanse and ethnically cleanse actually sounds nice, like someone's cleaning your kitchen, to exterminate and eradicate Palestinians at a apocalyptic level. And so it was a reaction to a decades-old problem that was further perpetrated by Israel itself. And it also happens to be the saving grace for Netanyahu to stay in power. Because for the amount of war crimes and the amount of laws that he's broken in Israel, many prime ministers, or I should say many high-ranking officials, have been thrown in jail for much less than what he's been charged with. But as long as the war continues, he can remain in power. So there's an element of it where you can blame it on just the ego and the goal of Netanyahu to stay in power, but it's much deeper than that, and it's and like I said, it's a depraved society. I mean, they Israelis are taught to kill Palestinians. Israelis are taught in schools. They teach their children that Palestinians are animals. Israelis are taught that they are superior humans than Palestinians. Israelis play games with deciding whether they want to snipe kids in the kneecaps or in the groin or in the head. It's a depraved society, and there's a Telegram channel with over 100,000 people in Israel that post about their war crimes daily. And
really,
you don't see that from Palestinians because we're not sick. We're not going to destroy the land that's ours. We're not going to uproot an olive tree that's older than all of us combined. We don't do that because it's our land. And the problem with Palestinians is that we're oblivious. And we were oblivious for a long time. And now that we finally see what's happening, and when I say oblivious, I mean in the 1940s, 1950s oblivious. Now it's blatantly obvious. And we allowed someone into our land, just like the Native Americans allowed the Europeans to come into Native America, right? And what's left is a couple of Indian reservations, right? You might get one in North Carolina, and in exchange you get a casino. And that's the plan for Gaza. And so this is why it's a tough conversation for Americans to have, because this is your history. This is American history. This is my American history as an American citizen born and raised here. It's sad that our tax dollars go to funding this genocide, and we don't have a choice. Nor do you have a choice in the congressperson that you get to elect, nor the president, but that's a different question.
That is a different question. One I don't have on my sheet, but maybe we'll get into. So, do you believe the Israeli government is indeed solely focused on the destruction of Hamas, that if Hamas were to disappear off the face of the earth, that this war would just end?
In 1982, there was a similar issue in Lebanon, where Israel was attacking a Lebanese village, and the militia there was told to stand down. And when they finally surrendered and they gave up their arms, Israel went in and killed, raped, and disemboweled 3,500 people in 1982. So with that historical context in place, and I'll get you the actual name of the massacre itself. There's so many massacres, it's hard to keep track. But with that context in place, Palestinians know that resistance is the only method of survival. And Hamas itself was actually funded by the Israeli government as opposition to the PLO, to the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And so they had a problem with being able to control the PLO, so they created these small militias to be able to fight against the Palestinian Liberation Organization. That's how Hamas was created. And so Hamas was a problem that Israel created to justify the future genocide. Because where are they going to get their weapons from? They don't have an airport, dude. They don't have access to ships. There's nothing. There's nothing that you can do in Gaza. You can't leave. You can't get out. They say, well, just get out. You can't. There's no way to get out. And the people that are there now, we see it as faith. As Muslims, we see it as they have the utmost faith. But when you're desperate and there's nothing or no one else that can help you, the only thing and the only entity that can help you is God. And this is why Palestinians will stay on their land until their very last breath. Christian Palestinians included.
You brought up something there I want to dig into. Funding of Hamas. Now, this gets into what some people would deem as tinfoil hat type conversation, but it seems pretty well documented that up until recently, and I'd like for you to, correct me where I'm wrong and give me the real details, that we have on record really since 2019 at the least that Hamas has been funded via cash infusions from the Qatarian government via Israelis. So the Israeli government allowing Qatar to fund Hamas. Am I saying that right?
It sounds like we're saying the same thing. Sounds like Israel is still funding Hamas.
Yeah, okay. So I just want to
now,
make
whether
sure.
they use a proxy to do that, in terms of the logistics, I'm not sure, but I think it's pretty well documented that Israel has been funding Hamas for decades, and it was a resistance group that they formed to fight the PLO.
So from your perspective, is this a land grab, a holy war, a security issue, a mix of all three?
This is where I kind of have to ask you. So, like, what are Christians waiting for? You're not waiting for the Messiah. You're waiting for the Antichrist.
Unfortunately, yeah, that's pretty much how the book plays out right now.
So we, as Muslims, are also waiting for the Dajjal, who we also consider the Antichrist. But what is the Israeli Zionist group looking for? What are they waiting for?
Their Messiah, correct?
Yeah. They're waiting for their Messiah, and we're over here waiting for the Antichrist. What does that tell you? You're waiting for a satanic figure to emerge. They're waiting for their savior.
How do you interpret that? What does that say to you?
It says to me that their savior is Satan. That's what it says to me.
And I think a lot of people, and I'll speak for the Christian side as much as I can. I think in America there are definitely multiple sects of how we view the Bible, how we view Christ. I mean, heck, I think 90% of American Christians think Jesus was white. I don't think that there are enough Christ-bound Christians who have indoctrinated themselves through the Gospels to know how Jesus lived. I know in the Muslim culture, you guys know Jesus lived, was a prophet, and was a great teacher. So we can agree he lived and taught great things. And I believe that, at least in America, there's this, I hate to say, European colonial white supremacist viewpoint around Christianity, and I think it strangles us as Christians between this, well, we're supposed to be supporting Israel because the Bible says it, but the same exact people who say that haven't actually read Genesis 12, don't actually understand the use of the word Israel as Abraham's son, he who wrestled with God, and that when Christ died and resurrected himself, that he proceeded to say that I am the new Israel. Jew and Gentile, if you fall under me, we're the Israel. This we're not talking about land. The land of Israel didn't exist. It was Judea. So I think for Christians in America right now, a lot, and I speak to some, one of my best friends, I won't say his name, but one of my best friends, he battles with this. And I get a little frustrated with him because I'm like, open the book. Right? Like, open the book. It's there. It's there. And to what you're speaking on of we're waiting for the Messiah while they're waiting for the Antichrist, that tickled my brain a little bit. I mean, I'm gonna do some more.
Yeah, look,
research.
the interesting thing is that it's Christians that are being massacred in Palestine.
And a lot of people don't know that.
I think they know, they just don't care because the Christians are the wrong color.
Damn. Do you think mass media has a lot to do with the perspective of this situation? The overall
Obviously.
international opinion?
Yeah, obviously.
Why do you think that is? What's the benefit?
Why does the media benefit from controlling the narrative?
Yeah. Or specifically around this topic?
It's not just specifically around this topic. It's around any topic that doesn't profit, that they can't profit from.
And
You
where would
know,
you? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
well, okay, so I want to ask you about your perspective on Charlie Kirk and kind of the whole conservative, and he was considered more of a middle of the road conservative. He wasn't like an extreme right wing. He was still sort of, what do they call it? Groypers?
Groyper, Judeo-Christian value. Yeah.
Right. And I have a question about what Judeo-Christian also means, and we'll get to that. But like for Charlie Kirk specifically, obviously he was a conservative Christian man. He said a lot of things that were hateful to other races and other religions. But he nevertheless kept the conversation open for dialogue. And one of the interesting things about Charlie was that he had these very strong beliefs and convictions, and he would debate people about them, and he wouldn't have any qualms with debating. He just wanted to keep the conversation going. But when it came to the topic of Israel, it almost seemed like there was never a good answer. Why do Americans support Israel so much? And I think you've seen the Tucker Carlson interview with Ted Cruz, where Ted is like, "Whoa," because it says in Bible school they taught us that you got to bless Israel.
That's a spot on Ted Cruz right there. That's a good
You
impression.
got to bless Israel, so that's what we do. But it's like, are you saying that the Israel in the Bible is the same one of Netanyahu's government? It's like, yes. And I think that's sort of the problem, right? But no one wants to ever believe that everything that they've known and everything that they've believed has been perfectly scripted, and it's been indoctrinated, and it's been brainwashed. And so was the Bible originally written in English?
No.
What was
Aramaic.
it originally written in?
I believe it was originally Aramaic.
Right. And so it was, I think it was like in the 1700s was when the King James Bible first came out, the first like version of the King James Bible.
Can we look that up, Sean? I'm not 100% the date of that one.
I'm not trying to like, doing a gotcha here.
No. The Schofield Bible, which was introduced in the 40s, which was penned by a leading Zionist and funded by the Rothschild family to be written, was the first commentary that linked Genesis 12, Abraham's statement around Israel, to there needing to be a holy land linked to it. In fact, to my understanding, the term Zionism or anti-Zionist came from 1891. It's not a historic word. It's not something that's based in long-term history. It's something.
Zionism is a political movement, just like communism, just like socialism. It's a political movement. It just happens to be a very violent one. But the reason I was asking that was because there are things that will be lost in translation. I speak multiple languages. There are certain, and I can tell you because I speak Arabic fluently, and I speak Spanish fluently, and I speak English fluently. I can tell you that there is a much deeper language in Arabic than there exists in English. I think there's like 1.2 million words that exist in the Arabic vocabulary. I also studied Chinese when I lived in China. I can tell you there's a very deep, rich history of culture and nuance in the language. And I also know that when you're trying to translate things, there are words that simply don't have a proper translation for them. Like if you're trying to explain something as being hot or spicy, right? There are different ways to describe the spiciness level within Arabic, and these words just simply don't exist in English. And I know that's a very dumbed down version of it, right? But it's impossible that the English Bible that you're reading right now is a perfect translation of the original Aramaic one. Impossible. I'm not saying that the context isn't the same. Same information, same things that were passed down, but it's impossible that information is exactly verbatim because you can't translate something from one language to another. And so I think people took advantage of that. I think there was an opportunity for King James and the Schofield Bible to just alter it just a little bit, where 99.9% of it is spot on. But then the little things that actually benefit them, like bless Israel, were misconstrued. And I think that's a much more logical sort of explanation for why there's a massive Christian indoctrination of blessing Israel and being so supportive of a nation that will literally spit on you, Zach. You go to Israel, they will spit on you for being a Christian. Unless you go with, Israeli forces, you're going on a Friends of the IDF tour, or you're going on a birthright trip, which, by the way, no other country has a birthright trip besides Israel. So these are things that you also have to question as an American Christian. It's what is the reason for this? I know the reason as a Muslim, because my religion and my book has been the same for 1,400 plus years. There's not a single word, not a single accent, not a single letter that has been taken out of context. The language that's passed down is the same exact language, which, by the way, Hebrew itself was completely eradicated. It was recently brought back in the past 120 years. The modern day Hebrew that that you hear, that's supposed, when you think, oh, it's old Hebrew, it's not. They took pieces of Arabic, they took pieces of Yiddish, they took pieces of different languages to create the Hebrew language. And so I think the deep, deep understanding of this for me is Christians and Muslims are together in this. And I think there is a Luciferian indoctrination of a group of people, let's just call them the Z's, that have an intent to change the world dynamics by pinning the Muslims and the Christians together. And if you read the Old Testament, it's a very violent book. It's statistically twice as violent as the Quran.
The Quran.
Because I think you had like 5.4% of your phrases or words were violent, whereas like only 2.7% of the words in the Quran are violent. There's 15 million people in the world that have memorized the entire Quran, letter by letter, word for word, verbatim. You can't erase that. And I think what's left of Christianity, respectfully, is a watered-down version of what the original Christian teachings are. And I think if you look at the destruction of all of the Russian Christians in the Bolshevik Revolution, and how in American history you're not taught about the 30 to 60 million Christians that were murdered during the Bolshevik Revolution, but you're taught about the Holocaust, it should tell you some things. And it should also tell you there's a reason, because this question came from, what does the media benefit from this, right? The media benefits from division. The media benefits from there being two sides, because historically, Rothschild or whoever else, they're going to fund both sides to kill each other off. That's why it's happening. And the scariest thing about Charlie's death is that they're placing a division between the left and the right in America. And I never had the chance to meet him, never had the chance to talk to him. It would have been great to have this, dialogue, just like you're allowing me and blessing me with the opportunity to speak with you, brother, and I really appreciate it. I'm scared for America because they're making it into a left-wing, right-wing argument when it's not. It's not. We're all Americans at the end of the day. We want to be able to practice and we want to be able to exercise our First, Second, Third, Fourth Amendment rights. We want to be able to practice our religion. We want to be able to have the right to bear arms. This is what America was built on. And now you're starting to see people in Florida get thrown in jail for saying fuck Israel. Now you see that 37 states in America have anti-boycott laws where you can't get a government contract with that state unless you're not boycotting Israel. Now you're seeing new acts that are passed in Congress where no weapons manufacturer is allowed to sell weapons to America unless they also sell weapons to Israel. Now you're seeing, just curious if you know this number, there's 535 Congress people in America. How many of them have taken money from Israel? or
I believe
accepted.
it's all but 5. It's a very significant number.
525.
Okay, so 10.
You know, and that should be scary, right? Like, why are our legislators in Israel right now? And so I don't, this is not a Muslim Christian, you know, right wing, left wing issue. This is shit. We lost our country to Israel. And now we have no choice to keep funding the genocide. We don't even have a choice. We just have to wait for 2026, 2028 for the next election if we have one. So the question is, like, what are we going to do about it? As Americans, what are we going to do about it?
I want to get back to that question. I brought up a couple things from what you had just said. AIPAC is what you're referencing, being the funder. I'm going to read that too, Sean, of these congressmen and women who are, you're like you said, 250 of them currently there. And that was originally the American Zionist Council, which was the group that JFK was telling to register as a foreign agent. He was pressuring for inspections of the nuclear facility. He also wanted to have silver coins added to gold so we wouldn't have to drop from the gold standard and rely on the Federal Reserve. He made some ripples. I think Christians just are missing the key point of Jesus' teaching, where he said, love your neighbor unless you disagree with them. You know, love everybody except your enemy. Like, he didn't say that. He said to love everyone, Jew and Gentile. He said to love your neighbor regardless of your belief. And Paul even teaches, you know, if you disagree with them, find peace. There's zero reason to argue about this. What will arguing in anger help in bringing somebody to the Christ or to God? I do have the King James Version. In 1611, the King James Version of the Holy Bible was published in England. No other book has had as much of an impact on the world as this historic translation. Early century scholars, can you pull that up a little bit for me, maintained the translation by modifying grammar, spelling, and word usage. The biblical language alive and relevant for each new generation. In 1769, updates were made to the King James Version, ceased, and its words continue to be cherished to this day. And the New King James Version, with a 130-person Greek, Hebrew, and English scholar team, edited it down in 1979, releasing only the Book of Psalms in 1980. 1982, the full release was made, so that we can all be right about our dates. So, mass media benefits from division. That's the last thing I want to hit on that you just talked about. Charlie is probably our most recent example of that, where we have both sides equally, one celebrating a death and cheering it on, and another...
Which is crazy, by the way. That's sociopathic behavior.
Yes.
Like, let's be clear about that. Like,
yes.
You shouldn't be...
Cheering on death is like the most, how hypothetical...
It's like, it's Israeli. It's not American.
Well, just any death. You and I, Ali, the fact that we're having this conversation, Ali, means one thing. Anybody listening to this, we all share one common bond. None of us have died. To celebrate something that you've never experienced or know, that in and of itself is sick. That's ignorant in and of itself. And for one side to be calling for more violence, another to be making it a martyr, when in the reality of all of this, somebody died. And millions of people die. Hundreds of thousands of people, genocide, are dying. We have school shootings. We have churches getting shot up. 2 Democrats and their dog shot. We have 2 people that mysteriously hung in Mississippi. Like, we have death happening so often. It is curious to me why this was the wake-up call for some Christians. And I even made a couple posts about that, of why this was the wake-up call. But maybe it brings more connectedness and togetherness. I don't know, but you're right. The division is there.
What I'm seeing is that a lot of people are coming back to church.
That has been reported. Yes.
Which is great. I think we all need to get closer to God. But if your church celebrates the ethnic extermination of Palestinians, you probably need to go to another church. Is that fair to say?
It's very fair to say. And if anyone's listening to that thinking I don't have any of that near me, 2819 Church, I'm going to shout your spot out, down in Atlanta, Georgia. My pastor is Pastor Philip Anthony Mitchell, and I'm a digital disciple of his, and he preaches the word. He doesn't sprinkle in what we're talking about. He's straight up with it. I want to get to a few more questions. This has been great so far. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
What do you think the role right now, because you mentioned what do we do, so I want to shift a little bit more into that conversation. What is the role internationally of the United States, European Union, the United Nations, Arab states in resolving this? Can there be a peaceful resolution?
If someone's purpose is to eradicate you, eradicate your identity, to exterminate your belief system, to destroy your way of living, just assume that there's an enemy that's coming to do all of that. I think the least that you can do is resist it, stop it from infiltrating. And that involves community building. That involves not being addicted to our phones and being stuck to technology 24/7. I think that includes whatever rabbit hole you want to go down. I'm good with it, but you just kind of have to guide me on this direction where you want this answer to go. I think we just need to sit down and talk and have more conversations, and especially with people of opposite faiths, because there are some people who just want you gone. You can't have a conversation between the sword and the neck. Like Edward Said said, a famous Palestinian activist, you don't want us to have a conversation as Palestinians. You want us to capitulate. You want us to surrender. You want us to have a conversation between the sword and the neck. There's no conversation at the guillotine. The conversation is done at that point. So what is everything that you can do before you get to the guillotine? It's resistance. You have to resist it. You have to resist the dilution of your religion. You have to resist the dilution of the family unit. You have to resist the dilution of your culture, of your religion, of your family. And to be honest, I actually understand racism. Like, I understand, like, in the context of, white supremacy, why it's important for white people, some white people, not all, to want to maintain their heritage and their culture and their whiteness, because if it starts getting, mixed with other races, then there won't be any white people left. I understand why you would want to do that. I understand self-preservation. In fact, I'll throw this in on my end too, just so I'm not just targeting white people. In Palestinian cultures, some of the weirdest things happen, where people will only marry from within their village. So if you're in a village of like 30,000 people, they only want people from that village because they have a unique way of life, a unique accent, a unique dialect. My brother was one of those. He was able to like marry from a specific village, and he was like the unicorn that was able to, to do that. And for me, my wife is Syrian. I don't see any difference between Palestinian or Syrian or Lebanese or Jordanian. It's all that Levant region. And similarly, I think a lot of like white Europeans don't have a problem with, French, German, as long as it's kind of like the same, background, I can sort of live with it. So I understand we can call it racism, but maybe it's better to call it self-preservation. I understand that. What I don't understand is why white Christians will support Israelis more than they support themselves. Why they will give more money and more power and more leniency to a foreign government, to a group of people that don't like you, that don't want you there, that will spit on you if you go. Watch interviews of Christians visiting Palestine, visiting Israel. They get spit on. They're taught that. The kids are taught to spit on people that are not among them. And this is not taught in the Torah, by the way. This is not a Jewish tradition. This is a Talmudic tradition, which is a rabbinical revision of the Torah. And we can get into that maybe on a separate topic, but I would encourage you just to read the Talmud and see what's in there, because it's the same way that Judaism has been usurped by these rabbis that use it for political gain. Same way that the Rothschild family was able to support and fund wars on both sides. And, his initial offspring, he sent them to 5 different countries so that they could be able to set up the Rothschild Bank. that dilution of the religion, eventually it becomes used as a weapon. It becomes weaponized. And I fear that that's what's happening with Christianity, that there's a dilution in Christianity and it's becoming weaponized. And the target is Muslims. And that's not the actual target. That the enemy of Christ is Satan. The enemy of Christ is not Muslim.
Do you have any reaction when, and I'm sure you do, when people give the blanket statement of just release the hostages?
Yeah,
What's
you know,
what's your initial reaction
when you're,
to that?
you ever tried to negotiate with a 2-year-old? You have any kids?
Having a 6-year-old daughter, yes, I still have to negotiate with a 6-year-old.
Yeah, so you know, there's certain people that haven't developed to the level of logic. And some people, they can be saved. Some people, you can sit down and have a conversation with them. But usually when someone is at such an extreme level of sociopathic behavior that they don't listen or want to believe anything else except for their own indoctrinated world, some of those people cannot be saved. And it's not that I don't think there's a reason to try to argue with a speaker, right? Just a speakerphone. Because it's not a two-way communication. It's just someone screaming and yelling, and they're not willing to listen. So anyone that's willing to listen on the response to free the hostages, I will tell you that in multiple massacres where Palestinians, Lebanese, and Syrian people had gone through something similar where they had hostages and they surrendered or released them, they were exterminated as a result. And so the hostages, the few that are left, which, by the way, Israel's killing most of them, the few that are left are the only way that Palestinians can remain in existence. There's no reason to completely eradicate them right now because you'll eradicate all the hostages as well. And by the way, they can click that button. They can do it at any time. But they just want to be treated as humans. The goalpost has moved so far. You know, like Palestinians want to get back to pre-2023, which by the way, there was like 64% unemployment in Gaza. There was there was only one cancer hospital in all of Gaza with over 2 million people. There was no airport. It had been bombed by Israel in 2003 before they, left in 2005. There was poisoned water wells and water supply systems. There were laws in place where you can't even collect rainwater. All of these things were prior to 2023. In addition to a massive 20-foot wall that's a barricade to have literal fish in the barrel that are shot and killed at any given time. And if you are watching news from Palestine over the past few decades, like my family always had in the living room, you'd see that this has been happening over and over again, just not to this level. And so the answer to free the hostages is the hostages are in Congress. That 98% of Congress, the politicians, the president, the vice president, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who took off his cross to be able to have a conversation with Netanyahu? Is that Christ-like? The hostages are in your government. And the consequence of that is what you're seeing in Gaza.
Not the direction I thought you were going to take, but I like the direction you took. So let's kind of round this up. One more question around just the future. What do you want the general public, particularly those that are far removed from the conflict, obviously, as most all Americans are. We're only taught what we're taught. We only know what we're seeing on mass media. What do you want us to understand most clearly? Anybody listening to this right now, and they're hearing so many things they've never heard before. They have no clue what the Balfour Declaration was. They have no clue that it was owned by British royals before that. They have no clue about the Arab-Israeli War, the Six-Day War. They have no idea about any of this. So what is the just general knowledge you want someone to be able to take away from this about what's going on?
Are we speaking to Americans here?
Yes.
So the general knowledge for Americans is you should make sure that American rights remain protected. It's not your responsibility to look at every other country and everyone else. Don't worry about what's happening in other countries. Worry about what's happening right in front of you. Worry about your family. Worry about your home. Worry about the rules and the regulations that are in your immediate community. That's the only thing that's in your control, and that's the only thing that should prioritize over other things. And question anytime a group of people gets prioritized over Americans in your own country.
But what do people do about it, right? Because I think a lot of people get to that point and they realize they don't really have an option. Like, what do you do as an American if you feel like you are watching a genocide, you're seeing an unfolding of an ethnic cleansing, and you don't see your lawmakers doing anything about it? In fact, you see some of them rousing it on. You see political pundits, again, not addressing it or rousing it on. And man, you even see people like Kirk begin to shift their opinions. And whether or not you want to connect the dots to his assassination, there's no doubt that he has a stranglehold on the conservative under 30-year-old. And he was shifting his opinion pretty rapidly. And now he's gone. It almost seems like a threat to Americans. So what does an American do that wants to see this stop and wants to see our own government stop focusing on every other effort, funding every other thing other than our own healthcare problems, our own power problems? I'm a real estate agent. This whole thing started for me when I started seeing clients making over $100,000 that couldn't afford a home. I used to be able to sell you a home if you had a full-time job working at McDonald's, as long as you had a 620 credit score and decent savings. It's all seemed to be pulled out from under us. What can Americans do? Do you think that there's just going to be a point where they revolt?
I think you would revolt financially first. I think you would revolt. The answer is revolution, but revolution doesn't start violently. Revolution first starts verbally. It first starts with discourse, conversations, talking to your local elected officials, saying, "Hey, we don't want money going to Israel anymore." Where do you live, Zach?
Delaware.
So I don't even know off the top of my head, but I'm willing to bet, even though I'm a Muslim and I don't gamble, I'm willing to bet that your governor in Delaware has given Delaware taxpayer money to Israel.
I am proud to say we are one of the 9 states that haven't.
Oh man, so you're.
I'm very proud to say
lucky
that we're one
for
of the
you.
9 states that are.
Well, that's
not
why Delaware is good to do
bonds.
business in. That's why everyone sets up Delaware LLCs. You know, I get it.
We're America's shell corporation, yes. But
I could probably guess the other 9. By the way, they're probably all the pro-business states. But Georgia, that's not the case. They gave like $10 million. Meanwhile, our schools suck. Right. I think first it starts verbally and being able to vote people out and have conversations. If anyone is beholden to a foreign government, then they can't be also beholden to America. I want Americans to prioritize America. I'm not coming to America and living here to prioritize Palestine. I'm a visitor here. I'm an immigrant. My family are immigrants. I was born and raised here, so I get the citizenship. But I understand that I'm an American. And so Americans need to take control of their own country. First, it happens with conversation. Second, it happens with finances. So you get to choose where you spend your money. And third, if those things aren't enough and they're still forcing you, they're suppressing your voice, they're suppressing your financial abilities, they're suppressing your movement, then you resort to violence. That's how revolutions happen. And I'm worried because we're a very armed country. I think we have like a 3-to-1 ratio of guns to adults. And so I hope that when that revolution happens, Americans realize it's not left versus right. It's the haves versus the have-nots. It's the ones that have gotten $1.2 trillion richer in the past year, where you're struggling to pay your mortgage. If there's someone else that's also struggling to pay their mortgage, that's not your enemy. If there's someone else that is working multiple jobs and trying to support their family and they're getting kicked off of health insurance, that's not your enemy. The enemy is the person that created that problem. And there's this really good cartoon that I see come up from time to time. And there's this like fat, rich dude that has this huge tower of cookies in front of him. And then there's like a white guy and a black guy. And they put a cookie in the middle. And the fat, rich white guy is like, be careful, that foreigner wants your cookie. As he's hoarding this massive amount of pile of cookies. And I think that's what's happening in America right now, except they're able to, the biggest divide will be left versus right. Like, that's the biggest division. Dude, Muslims and Palestinians are so insignificant and so under the radar that it's like they'll just throw us in with the leftists and the radical liberals, right? That's why Netanyahu went on camera within 2 days of Charlie's death.
24 hours. Yeah.
24 hours, blaming it on Islamists and radical Muslims. Oh, and the leftists. And then Ben Shapiro, the same thing. Ben Shapiro went on Bill Maher and said, we know that he is of the left. And Bill's like, dude, we don't know shit. We're just guessing at this point. Meanwhile, Ben gets to take over Turning Point USA, which has the biggest following of those under 30 conservatives. So question anyone in America that doesn't prioritize America. And by the way, I will mention this. Sharia law has embedded into it that you must follow the law of the land in which you live. I'm an insurance lawyer. Insurance is against my religion.
I didn't know that.
But it's mandated by law. So we must have insurance. Now, if you were living in an Islamic country, there would not be insurance. But you know what else the Islamic country has? A requirement of a 2.5% tax on every single person, no matter what. And imagine if we got 2.5% of the top 10 wealthiest people in America. You'd solve a lot of problems.
Oh, don't get me into a wealth tax. We could do another hour on that. Yeah.
Well, you just have to question the things that are not prioritizing America. And if you're the governor of your state is sending money to Israel, and your local mayor is sending money to Israel, and there's laws in place where you don't have the choice of your money not going to Israel. Pennsylvania is another one. Pennsylvania is about to lose the seat of the governor. So they passed a law very quickly that said no governor is allowed to not send money to Israel, not allowed to boycott Israel. And so, you really have to think, where is all the money going? It's going to Israel.
Well,
and
just
it's not
to
going
further
to
your
veterans.
point, Florida just recently passed a law because they are the largest investor in Israeli bonds. Florida is.
Yeah. There's one county in Florida, I think in Palm Beach.
Palm Beach,
$700
the home
million.
of Jeffrey Epstein and Mar-a-Lago. That's weird.
Yeah, it is weird.
That is weird. But they recently, Israel, released their rating on those bonds. And for those listening don't know what that means, it's just a guarantee of return. It's the level of strength of the investment. And they released that guarantee. So Florida pretty much said, okay, well, we're not going to invest in essentially a junk bond. That doesn't make sense. Why would we buy more? And so they went and passed a law saying we're not allowed to discriminate against the rating of a bond, and we have to buy them anyway. Going right back to your point of the tax money is going there regardless, even when it's not a solid investment.
So, Zach, I want to give us a shorter answer to your question
Please.
of what can Americans do.
Please.
Americans can use their voice and their money to make decisions. Don't invest and don't spend your money in a company or an organization that doesn't support America. Any country, any politician, and any person, any politician, any business that is taking money away from Americans to send it to a foreign entity and not reinvesting it back into this country is not your ally. You should be boycotting any organization, any company that doesn't align with American values. That's what you do as an American, because that's what Chinese people do in China. That's what Japanese people do in Japan. The most American thing that you can do is choose to spend your money with American companies that are investing back into America and paying their due taxes and not poisoning and posting up politicians that are taking your money to a foreign country.
I don't know if there's much more that needs to be said, Ali. I have a question to ask of you, though. Yeah. I always end our show in prayer, but before I do so, could I ask for you to say a prayer in your religion over me? So,
I will say this. I grew up in Dalton, Georgia, in the Bible Belt. And I did martial arts with the master instructor Ben Kiker, who trained under Chuck Norris. And
Wow.
it was a Christian martial arts school. And part of the requirement to get your black belt was that you had to memorize the first psalm of the Bible. And so I'll just say that blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. So, brother, do your thing, man. I grew up in Dalton. I grew up playing football at Dalton High School. You know, all
What
that stuff
position?
is... I was a wide receiver.
I was just about to say you look like a wide receiver. I was just about to say that.
Yeah, I have a whole story about that. I wrote about it in my book. But I would be honored if you say a prayer and close us out.
Please. Thank you. Lord Jesus Christ, thank you for our time together today. Thank you for the communication and technology allowing this conversation to even take place. I pray, Lord, that the peace that surpasses understanding will be blessed upon the ears of anyone who's listening that feels dark, that feels dreary, that feels worn down and exhausted by what's going on in this spiritual warfare that we are in the midst of. I thank you, and I pray blessings upon Ali and everything that he is touching at this moment as he's being a voice, I believe, for exactly what you came to this earth to perpetuate. And I pray for blessings and safety for him and everyone within the sound of my voice. Amen.
Thank you, brother.
Friend, I want to have more conversations together, but more off, I want to perpetuate what you said and encourage everybody within the sound of our voices to do the same, to communicate, to talk, to learn, to understand that we only know what we've been taught, to have patience and understanding with those that are ignorant, not sometimes by choice, but by force, and that there's true evil going on in this world. And I think you made some very astute claims right there when you talked about, you know, Christians and Muslims are waiting on the Antichrist. Meanwhile, the people who are currently perpetuating the evil, many would argue, is waiting on the exact opposite, which is, I think, very telling. I think it's a good culmination of what we're talking about. Anything you want to end on? Where can people follow you, communicate with you, see your message online?
I'm CEO Lawyer on all platforms, and I've actually never done a conversation like this. So, you know, because this was such a good experience, I'm looking forward to having more conversations. I love interfaith dialogues. I hopefully on the next one I get to ask you some questions about, you know, Christianity and the belief system that people have, and kind of how this evolution was. What was it like when you grew up in, you know, in church, and how often were you going? Because I have my own story and you've got yours. Yeah. And I think the more that we, you know, humanize each other and talk to each other, maybe we can resist that infiltration into our belief system. And just so everyone is aware, Hamas is a resistance group. It's not a military occupation with weapons and all this crazy stuff. It's a resistance group. And if you think that what's happening to Palestinians is not going to happen to you eventually, you're asleep at the wheel.
It's a powerful message to end on. Brother, we will have more conversations. What a great cliffhanger for episodes in the future. I'm sure we're going to get to have more, and we can absolutely dig into it. We can absolutely dig into it.
Thank you, man. I hope I didn't, you know, make you feel uncomfortable, but I had a good conversation with you.
This is exactly what's needed to bring about less division, is simply understanding where people came from, what they believe, what they were taught to believe, what's actually true, versus what's perpetuated propaganda. Brother, great conversation. Blessings for you, and we're going to communicate more soon, all right?
Thank you, man. You have a good one.
All right, friend. You too.
Take care.